The Crystal Conservatory at Kensington Academy sparkled under the Los Angeles night sky. 500 millionaires gathered beneath the vaulted glass ceiling. The annual spring gala represented the pinnacle of Black high society. Waiters glided across imported Italian marble floors. They balanced silver trays piled with beluga caviar. They poured endless streams of Dom Perignon into crystal flutes. The air smelled of white tiger orchids, roasted truffles, and expensive Tom Ford cologne. Serena Kensington stood near a towering ice sculpture. She smoothed a hand down the front of her cream silk maternity dress. She traced the 5-month swell of her belly. Aria fluttered inside her, a tiny rhythmic kick. Serena smiled. She took a sip of iced lemon water. She belonged in this room, not because of the modest $50,000 salary she earned teaching kindergarten in the Academy's East Wing. She belonged here because her grandfather built the very walls holding up the glass roof. Her grandfather's name was etched into the cornerstone. The Kensington private school network spanned 3 continents. It boasted a net worth of nearly $3 billion. Julian did not know that. Serena had never told her fiancé about her billionaire family. She wanted to build a career on her own merit. She needed a man who loved her for her heart. She needed to know Julian wanted her, not her inheritance. Tonight, he had promised a grand surprise. He told her to wear her best dress. She assumed he meant to announce their pregnancy to his corporate peers. The microphone shrieked. The high-pitched squeal sliced through the low murmur of the crowd. The string quartet stopped playing. 500 faces turned toward the raised mahogany stage at the center of the room. Julian Vance stepped into the spotlight. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. The rich charcoal undertones caught the light of the 3-tiered crystal chandelier above his head. Serena had picked out that suit. She had stood in their shared apartment just yesterday morning, pressing the fabric against his chest, dreaming of the day they would walk down the aisle. He did not look at her now. Instead, he reached out his hand. Chloe DuPont emerged from the shadows of the velvet curtains. She wore blood red. The Valentino couture gown clung to her curves like a second skin. A massive diamond choker rested heavy against her collarbone. The thick stones clacked together. It was a loud, metallic clinking sound that echoed through the sudden silence of the room. She was the chairwoman of the Elite Parents Association. Her family wielded massive financial leverage over the Kensington School Board. Julian pulled Chloe flush against his side. He leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed through the surrounding speakers, "I asked for a moment of your time tonight to address a matter of institutional integrity." Serena froze. The ice water in her glass shifted. Condensation dripped onto her knuckles. "We send our children to Kensington Academy because we expect perfection," Julian continued. He paced the length of the stage. His leather shoes clicked against the wood. "We expect the staff to mold the next generation of leaders. We do not expect them to harbor deceit. We do not expect them to be moral failures." He stopped pacing. Raising his right arm, he pointed his index finger at the center of the room. He pointed at Serena. "Look at her." The crowd shifted. 500 pairs of eyes locked onto the cream silk dress. The wealthy patrons parted like a tide. Husbands pulled their wives backward. Women in expensive gowns recoiled. A wide, 10-foot circle of empty marble formed around Serena. "Serena Kensington," Julian said. He spat the syllables into the microphone. a 28-year-old kindergarten teacher who thought she could secure a lifetime of luxury by trapping a CEO. A woman who forgets her birth control, opens her legs, and expects a diamond ring in return. The room erupted into furious whispers. Serena stopped breathing, her chest locked tight. The cold air conditioning from the floor vents hit her bare shoulders. She did not shrink. She raised her chin. She stared straight at the man who had kissed her forehead this morning. Chloe laughed. The sound was sharp, cruel, and amplified. She leaned into the microphone. She adjusted the heavy diamonds at her throat, letting the stage lights catch the facets. "She thought she won the lottery," Chloe sneered. Julian nodded. He stepped down the first wooden stair. "Did you believe I would marry you? You drive a rusted sedan. You rent a walk-up apartment. You make $50,000 a year wiping toddlers' noses. I am the CEO of Vance Holdings." He descended the second stair. His eyes burned with arrogance. "My wife must be an equal," Julian declared. He gestured to Chloe. "A queen, not a charity case scheming for a payday. A man of my stature requires an alliance, not a burden." Serena kept her silence. Her jaw tightened. The vein beneath her ear throbbed. Her right hand curled around the side of her belly. She shielded Arya from the venom spilling across the room. "Do you know how exhausting it was?" Julian mocked, walking toward her, closing the distance. "Pretending to care about your little lesson plans? Listening to you talk about construction paper and finger paints while I was negotiating multi-million-dollar acquisitions? It was suffocating. I needed a placeholder. Someone blind enough to keep my bed warm while I secured my real future." He stopped 3 feet away from her. The scent of his expensive cologne turned her stomach. It smelled of lies. It smelled of rot. "I let you pick out wedding flowers," Julian gloated. His voice dropped to a low, theatrical whisper that the microphone still caught. "I let you taste cake flavors. I let you browse registries. It kept you complacent while I finalized a real merger, a union that matters. Chloe and I are engaged. The DuPont real estate portfolio and Vance Holdings are now one unified empire." Julian smirked. "Take a good look, Serena. This is the world you tried to steal your way into. It is rejecting you. You are nothing to these people." Chloe descended the stairs next. The red silk trailed behind her like a fresh bloodstain across the wood. She strutted to Julian's side. She hooked her arm through his. She jingled her diamond-encrusted wrist in the air. "The Elite Parents Association held an emergency vote this evening, Miss Kensington," Chloe announced. She didn't need the microphone. The room remained silent. "We drafted a formal petition. 30 of the most influential Black families in Los Angeles signed it. We handed the document to your principal an hour ago in the VIP lounge." Chloe smiled. Her red lipstick stretched thin. "We gave him a choice," Chloe stated. "Terminate the pregnant spinster, or watch us drain the school's endowment fund by sunrise. We own the school board, we fund the expansions, and we demand purity from the staff." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. A prominent neurosurgeon in the front row nodded. A tech founder's wife folded her arms and scoffed in Serena's direction. "You are terminated," Chloe declared. Her eyes danced with malice. "Effective immediately. Your keycard has already been deactivated. Your locker will be emptied by the janitorial staff. You will not set foot on this campus ever again." Serena looked at Chloe. Her eyes traced the red dress, then lingered on the heavy diamonds bought with leveraged debt. Finally, she shifted her gaze back to Julian. Julian crossed his arms. The fabric of his bespoke jacket pulled taut across his broad shoulders. He leaned in close. He wanted to see her break. "And do not bother looking for child support," Julian hissed. "My lawyers will bleed you dry in court before you see a single dime of my money. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 18 years. I will make sure you cannot even afford diapers." Serena's silence stretched. It expanded. It swallowed the room. Serena listened to the echoes of his threat. The floor vents blasted chilled air against her ankles. She felt the heavy stares of 500 people pressing against her skin like physical weights. The ice in her glass melted. A drop of water rolled down her wrist. She did not wipe it away. She absorbed the betrayal. She cataloged every insult. Julian wanted a reaction. He fed on emotional chaos. She starved him. She did not scream. She did not cry. Instead, she stood in her white dress, a pillar of quiet dignity amidst the grotesque display of wealth and cruelty. Her thumb stroked the cream fabric over her womb. Arya kicked again, a strong, steady reminder of life. By the heavy mahogany double doors at the entrance, a man stood hidden in the shadows. Marcus Reed, head of security for Kensington Academy. He wore a crisp black suit. His hands remained folded behind his back. He did not blink. He did not move to intervene. He noted the structural hypocrisy of the room. Men who kept mistresses in Beverly Hills condos were currently sneering at a pregnant kindergarten teacher. Women who bought their way onto charity boards were clutching their pearls in mock outrage. Marcus documented it all. A tiny, circular lapel camera rested on his chest. A faint green light blinked. Once, twice. He recorded every single word. He captured the high-definition audio of Julian's blackmail. He captured the exact angle of Chloe's smug grin. He logged the faces of every wealthy parent nodding in agreement. He recorded the public termination of the founder's only granddaughter. He waited. "Security!" Chloe called out. She waved a manicured hand toward the perimeter. Her bracelets clattered. "Escort the former employee off the premises. She is trespassing on private property." Julian laughed. A low, vibrating rumble in his chest. "Show yourself out, Serena, before they drag you out in front of everyone." Serena held his gaze for 5 long seconds. The silence suffocated him. He shifted his weight. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second under the sheer weight of her unblinking stare. She offered him no tears. She offered him no begging. She gave him nothing but a hollow, pitying look. She turned around. The crowd remained parted. A long, empty aisle of polished white marble stretched toward the exit. Serena walked. She placed one heel in front of the other. Her spine stayed rigid. Her head stayed high. The fabric of her cream dress brushed against the pristine floor. "That's right, walk away," Julian shouted to her, retreating back. He needed her to break. He needed her to shatter. "Go back to the slums you came from. You never belonged here." Serena reached the heavy mahogany doors. Marcus Reed stepped forward. He reached out his large, calloused hand. He pulled the brass handle down. He pushed the heavy door open for her. His face revealed nothing. His camera kept recording. Serena stepped past him. She walked out into the humid Los Angeles night. Julian's voice echoed one last time from inside the grand hall. "A pathetic, penniless fraud." The heavy brass-studded oak doors of the Crystal Conservatory clicked shut. The sudden silence hit Serena like a physical blow. The amplified echoes of Chloe DuPont's laughter vanished, replaced by the suffocating, humid weight of the Los Angeles night. The valet stand stood deserted. The attendants had all gathered near the side entrance, craning their necks to listen to the chaos unfolding inside the grand hall. Serena walked past them. She placed one cream silk heel in front of the other. Her spine remained rigid, her chin stayed elevated. She reached the entrance of the VIP parking structure. The air shifted. The fragrant scent of white tiger orchids and roasted truffles faded into the harsh, acrid sting of oxidized copper and car exhaust. The fluorescent tube lights overhead flickered. They cast a sickly, jaundiced yellow glow across the empty concrete corridors. Serena kept walking. She needed to reach the third level. She needed to reach her rusted Honda Civic. She needed to lock the doors, roll up the manual windows, and disappear into the sprawling grid of the city. Her right foot faltered. A sharp metallic whine pierced her eardrums. It sounded like a dentist's drill grinding directly into her skull. The pristine edges of the parking garage began to blur. The concrete walls bled into the gray ceiling. The rows of parked luxury vehicles, a cherry-red Ferrari, a matte black Maybach, a silver Porsche, stretched and warped like melting wax. Nausea clawed at her throat. She stumbled toward a reinforced load-bearing pillar. Her shoulder slammed into the rough cement. The impact jarred her collarbone. She braced her forearms against the cold gray surface, bowing her head as a wave of dizziness pulled the floor out from under her feet. She gasped for air. The oxygen tasted like stale dust and motor oil. Her fingers curled inward, scraping against the unforgiving texture of the pillar. The delicate cream silk of her maternity dress snagged on a jagged piece of exposed aggregate. The thread tore. Her knees buckled. Serena slid down the length of the column. Her body collapsed onto the unforgiving floor. The side of her face met the oil-stained concrete. The icy chill of the pavement seeped instantly through her thin silk dress, shocking her overheated skin. The grout line pressed a deep, unforgiving groove into her cheekbone. She lay there on her side, swallowed by the cavernous shadows of the third floor, listening to the erratic, terrifying hammer of her own heart. She curled her body inward. She brought her knees up toward her chest, forming a protective barrier around her midsection. Both hands moved instinctively to the 5-month swell of her belly. Arya kicked. It was not the gentle, rhythmic flutter from the ice sculpture earlier that evening. It was a sharp, frantic jolt, a tiny fist or heel striking the uterine wall in a blind panic. Arya felt the massive spike of cortisol flooding their shared bloodstream. The baby felt the terror. Serena closed her eyes tight against the dim lighting. She pressed her palms flat against the taut skin of her abdomen, trying to push warmth and calm through the layers of silk and muscle to reach the tiny life suspended inside her. The physical sensation of her daughter moving anchored her spiraling mind to the present moment. She focused on the cold floor against her cheek. She focused on the smell of damp earth lingering near the drainage grate. She focused on the steady pressure of her own hands, shielding her unborn child from a world that had just bared its teeth. Julian's voice echoed in the dark. The memory surfaced without warning, a pathetic, penniless fraud. The memory of his bespoke midnight blue tuxedo materialized behind her eyelids. She had stood in their cramped, walk-up apartment yesterday morning, holding that exact charcoal-hued jacket against his broad chest. She had brushed a stray piece of lint from his lapel. She had kissed his jaw. She had watched him smile, a soft, intimate curving of his lips that she had believed belonged solely to her. He had known he was going to stand on a mahogany stage and slaughter her. He had tasted the cake flavors with her. He had debated the merits of buttercream versus fondant. He had let her circle cribs in a baby catalog. He had built a pristine, glass-walled fantasy just to ensure the maximum amount of shrapnel when he shattered it. And Chloe, the chairwoman of the Elite Parents Association, the woman draped in a blood-red Valentino gown, her neck caged in heavy diamonds purchased with leveraged corporate debt. Chloe had orchestrated the termination. Chloe had severed Serena's modest $50,000 lifeline. They wanted her broken. They wanted her destitute. They expected her to spend the next 18 years drowning in legal fees, begging for scraps of child support, and weeping outside the gates of the Kensington private school network. Her chest heaved. A ragged, jagged breath scraped its way up her windpipe. Her hands shook so hard her fingernails dug crescent moon indentations into the palms of her own hands. The physical tremor radiated up her arms, rattling her shoulders. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tilt her head back and let out a guttural, feral wail that would shatter the flickering fluorescent tubes above her head. She clamped her teeth over her bottom lip. She bit down until the metallic taste of copper flooded her mouth. She swallowed the blood. She swallowed the scream. Footsteps echoed through the parking garage. Slow, deliberate, heavy, the rhythmic clicking of leather soles against concrete reverberated off the low ceiling. Someone was walking up the spiraled vehicle ramp. The sound grew louder. It carried the precise, measured cadence of a man who never rushed. Serena froze. She did not lift her head from the oil-stained floor. She kept her hands locked over her belly. She braced her muscles, preparing for the final wave of security guards. Chloe had promised an escort. Julian had laughed at the prospect of her being dragged off the property. She waited for the rough hands to grab her arms. She waited for the final humiliation of being tossed onto the Los Angeles sidewalk like discarded garbage. The footsteps stopped. A towering shadow eclipsed the harsh yellow light cast by the overhead bulbs. Serena opened her eyes. Heavy, black leather Oxford lace-up stood 3 feet from her face. The shoes were polished to a flawless mirror shine. Above the shoes, the sharp, immaculate crease of custom-tailored black suit trousers broke the visual field. Marcus Reed looked down at her. The head of security for Kensington Academy stood in heavy silence. His massive frame blocked the draft of wind funneling through the open-air structure. The tiny, circular lapel camera still rested on his chest. The faint green light remained dark. He had finished recording. He did not speak. He did not offer a barrage of empty apologies. He did not tell her everything would be fine. He did not extend a hand to pull her off the dirty floor. A lesser man would have offered pity. A lesser man would have treated her like a fragile, shattered victim who needed rescuing. Marcus Reed knew better. He knelt. The fabric of his trousers tightened over his knees. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket. He withdrew a crisp, square handkerchief made of pure white linen. He placed it gently on the concrete, inches from her face. Next to the folded linen, he placed a business card. It was cut from heavy, matte black cardstock. The edges were gilded in silver. There was no company logo. There was no name. A single 10-digit private phone number sat embossed in the center of the dark paper. The silver foil caught the flickering overhead light. Marcus held her gaze for one long, silent second. His dark eyes conveyed a quiet, profound understanding. He recognized the steel buried beneath her trembling hands. He recognized the bloodline running through her veins. He bowed his head, a microscopic dip of his chin that bordered on a deferential salute. He stood up. He turned his back to her. He walked away. The rhythmic click of his Oxfords retreated down the concrete ramp. The heavy steel fire door groaned open on its hinges. It clicked shut. Serena was alone again. She stared at the matte black card. The embossed silver numbers seemed to pulse in the dim light. The violent ringing in her ears slowly faded into a dull hum. The edges of her vision sharpened. The gray haze of panic receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus that chilled the blood in her veins. She pushed her palms against the floor. Her triceps burned. Her joints popped. She pushed herself up from the concrete, lifting her torso until she sat back on her heels. The frigid air conditioning venting from the lower levels washed over her bare shoulders, but she no longer shivered. She reached out and picked up the white linen handkerchief. She pressed the soft fabric against her bruised cheekbone. She wiped away the smear of motor oil and grime. She blotted the single drop of blood weeping from her bitten lip. She picked up the business card. The thick stock felt heavy and substantial between her thumb and index finger. She traced the raised silver numbers. A quiet contact, a silent witness. A man who had stood in the shadows while a false king paraded on a wooden stage. Julian Vance believed he had destroyed a penniless kindergarten teacher. He believed his meticulously planned ambush had secured his future and eradicated his past. Chloe DuPont believed her family's financial leverage made her an untouchable queen. They believed they held all the cards. They believed they owned the board. Serena slipped the black card into the hidden pocket of her cream silk dress. She placed both hands back on her belly. Arya had stopped kicking. The frantic movements had settled into a steady, rhythmic thrum of life. Serena stroked the curve of her womb. She made a silent vow to the tiny heart beating beneath her palms. Julian wanted her to beg. Chloe wanted her to cry. They wanted her to spend the rest of her life shrinking into the shadows, terrified of their wealth, intimidated by their influence. She would not beg. She would not shed a single tear for a man who smelled of rot and betrayal. She would not hide. She would not let a borrowed real estate portfolio dictate the future of the true Kensington heir. Her grandfather had built this empire from dirt and grit. Theodore Kensington had forged a $3 billion dynasty so his bloodline would never have to bow to anyone. Serena had hidden her name to find love. She had found a parasite instead. She planted her cream heels on the floor. She stood up. She brushed the abrasive concrete dust from the front of her ruined dress. She rolled her shoulders back. She lifted her chin, staring out across the dark expanse of the Los Angeles skyline, visible through the open garage walls. The city sparkled with a million indifferent lights. Julian had demanded she return to the slums. He had ordered her to leave the world of the elite. She reached into her purse. Her fingers wrapped around the worn plastic of her car keys. He had no idea. Miles away, the false king celebrated. He reveled in his cruel victory. Julian Vance tossed his bespoke midnight blue suit jacket onto the white leather sofa of his Wilshire Boulevard penthouse. The imported Italian leather sighed under the weight of the tailored wool. He unbuttoned the top two buttons of his crisp dress shirt. He walked toward the wet bar. The sprawling 10,000 square foot residence sat suspended above the city in heavy silence. A massive, original Rothko canvas dominated the far wall, bleeding crimson and black into the shadows of the room. He poured a generous measure of 20-year-old Macallan into a crystal tumbler. The amber liquid hit the heavy glass with a sharp, satisfying clink. The scent of aged oak and peat smoke filled the space between them. Chloe DuPont stepped out of the private elevator. She wore her blood-red Valentino gown like a victory flag. The massive diamond choker caught the low amber lighting of the living room. The thick stones clacked against her collarbone as she moved. She bypassed the wet bar. She walked directly to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the illuminated grid of Los Angeles. "Pour me a sparkling water with lime." Julian smirked. He grabbed a bottle of San Pellegrino from the stainless steel refrigerator. The cap twisted off with a sharp hiss. He poured the carbonated water into a highball glass, dropped in a lime wedge, and crossed the expanse of dark Brazilian walnut flooring. The wood felt cold beneath the thin soles of his Oxford shoes. He handed her the glass. "Did you see her face?" The sound vibrated deep in his chest. She just stood there, frozen. She looked like a peasant who accidentally wandered into Versailles, clutching that massive belly like it was some kind of armor. Chloe sneered. She tapped her manicured red fingernails against the condensation of her glass. The sound was sharp. It mimicked the ticking of a metronome. She wore a $50 cream dress to the spring gala. Chloe dragged a finger through the moisture on her glass. The fabric looked like cheap curtains under those stage lights. It was pathetic. She actually thought she belonged in our world. She stood there absorbing every word because she lacks the pedigree to fight back. Women like her are conditioned to take the abuse. Julian took a slow sip of his Macallan. The alcohol burned a hot, triumphant trail down his throat. He savored the sting. He savored the victory. She thought a baby would secure the bag. Julian paced away from the window, tracking his reflection in the glass. She thought she could trap me with a 5-month-old fetus and a kindergarten teacher's smile. I let her play house. I let her pick out linen napkins and debate the merits of buttercream frosting. It kept her docile. It kept the board distracted while I negotiated the DuPont merger. He stopped pacing. He stared out at the city. The headlights of distant cars looked like tiny, slow-moving stars trapped on the pavement. Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to care about a woman who drives a rusted Honda Civic? He relished the sound of his own voice in the cavernous room. She used to talk about her students. She used to tell me about finger paints and scraped knees while I was restructuring 9-figure hedge funds. I had to bite my tongue every single night. I had to smile. I built an entire psychological cage around her, and she locked the door herself. I even let her pick out the nursery colors, a grotesque shade of yellow. Chloe set her sparkling water on the marble windowsill. She followed him into the center of the room. Her red silk train dragged across the floor like a fresh blood stain. She stopped inches from his chest. She ran a single red acrylic nail down the center placket of his shirt. "The merger is done, Julian." She stepped closer. The heavy diamonds around her throat scraped against his shirt collar. The metallic friction sounded like a knife sharpening on a whetstone. "My father signed the final letters of intent an hour ago." Her voice lost its playful edge. The inheritance of ruthlessness bled into her tone. "The Elite Parents Association backed your play." The school board terminated her. "I mobilized 30 billionaires to crush a nobody. I delivered the public execution you wanted. We bled her dry in front of 500 people. Julian lowered his whiskey glass. He stared down at her. I want the 30% equity stake in Vance Holdings. Chloe tapped her fingernail against his breastbone. Once, twice. I want the board seat. I want the deed to the Malibu estate transferred into my name by Friday. And I want the 6-carat emerald-cut diamond ring we looked at in Geneva on my finger tomorrow morning. Julian smiled. His teeth flashed white in the dim shadows of the penthouse. He turned his back to her. He walked toward the massive oak desk sitting in the corner of the room. He picked up a thick manila folder. The edges were sharp. The heavy wax seal of his corporate attorneys stamped the front cover. He tossed the folder onto the black marble kitchen island. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. Dust motes danced in the ambient light above the marble. It is already in motion. Julian rested his hands on the cool stone. Pre-drafted lawsuits, breach of contract, defamation. A preemptive custody block that labels her an unfit mother based on documented mental instability. Chloe walked over to the island. She traced the edge of the legal folder. My lawyers manufactured a trail of fake financial ledgers. His voice dropped into a lethal velvet cadence. They spent the last 3 weeks fabricating a paper trail. The documents show she attempted to embezzle from my personal offshore accounts. They show wire transfers she never authorized. They show digital signatures she never signed. They show a desperate woman trying to steal millions to fund a lavish lifestyle she could never afford. Julian leaned over the marble counter. He wanted Chloe to understand the sheer magnitude of his cruelty. If she tries to fight for a dime of child support, we freeze her bank accounts pending a criminal fraud investigation. He watched her eyes widen. She makes $50,000 a year. My retainer alone is 5 times her annual salary. She will drown in legal debt before the baby takes its first breath. She will be begging on the street by October. Chloe opened the folder. She flipped through the dense, legalese-filled pages. Her eyes scanned the fraudulent asset transfers. You are going to take the child? I am going to leverage the child. Julian took another sip of his whiskey. I do not care about the infant. I care about the optics. A CEO of my stature cannot have a bastard child living in poverty across town. It is bad for shareholder confidence. We take full custody. We place the girl with a private nanny in the Malibu house. Serena Kensington will be legally barred from coming within 500 yards of my property. Julian stood up straight. He lifted his crystal tumbler to the overhead light. He watched the amber liquor swirl against the glass. He pictured Serena standing alone in the crystal conservatory. He pictured the cheap cream dress. He pictured her hollow, pathetic silence. He remembered the exact way she shielded her belly when he tore her life apart. She is nothing but a nameless charity case who thought her womb was a lottery ticket. Chloe smiled. Her red lipstick stretched thin over her teeth. She closed the legal folder. She slid it across the cool marble surface. Speaking of wombs, Julian lowered his glass. His eyes locked onto hers. Chloe placed a hand flat against the tight red silk of her gown. She looked down at her flat stomach. She looked back up at him. Her eyes gleamed with a practiced, manufactured warmth that did not reach the cold depths of her irises. You are going to need a real heir, Julian. She stepped into his personal space, an heir with the DuPont bloodline, an heir who will inherit a unified empire. Julian froze. His breathing stopped. Are you serious? 8 weeks. Chloe stroked the red silk covering her abdomen. I took the test this morning, a true alliance, a real family. Julian's chest expanded. A surge of pure, unfiltered triumph flooded his veins. He had won. He had secured the DuPont real estate portfolio, discarded his useless fiancée, and manufactured a flawless corporate dynasty in a single evening. The universe was bending to his exact will. Every calculated risk had paid off. "I need to call Harrison." He spun around. He pulled his phone from his tailored trousers. He paced toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, frantically dialing his lead attorney's private number. He pressed the phone to his ear. He turned his back to the room, staring out at the city lights. Chloe watched him walk away. She reached across the black marble island. She bypassed her glass of sparkling water. She picked up Julian's discarded crystal tumbler. She tilted her head back. She swallowed the remaining 2 ounces of 20-year-old Macallan in one long, continuous gulp. The heavy liquor burned a fiery path down her throat. She set the empty crystal glass down on the marble. She made no sound. She smoothed the red silk over her empty stomach. "Harrison," Julian barked into the phone. The lawyer had answered on the second ring. "File the paperwork, all of it." He listened for a moment. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass of the penthouse window. He looked invincible. The bespoke midnight blue suit clung to his broad shoulders. "I do not care what time it is," his voice echoed against the glass. "Wake the judge up. I want the asset freeze expedited. I want the custody block stamped by sunrise. If Serena Kensington tries to buy a single pack of diapers in this city, I want her debit card declined." He paused, listening to the legal counsel on the other end of the line. The faint hum of the penthouse air conditioning filled the silence in the room. "Yes, execute the embezzlement narrative." Julian braced his free hand against the cold window pane. "Bankrupt her by noon tomorrow. I want her buried so deep in subpoenas she forgets her own name. She thought she could steal my future. I am going to erase hers." He ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked out over the sprawling, illuminated grid of Los Angeles. Millions of lights flickered in the dark, stretching all the way to the Pacific Ocean. He owned this city. He controlled the narrative. He possessed the money, the power, and the bloodline. He adjusted his French cuffs. He admired the sharp cut of his bespoke suit in the reflection of the glass. He raised his empty hand in a mock toast to his own reflection. He was an untouchable king. His delusion carried into the dawn. Night broke into day. The morning sun breached the 81st floor of the Vance Holdings Tower. It flooded the glass-walled conference room in harsh, blinding light. 6 corporate litigators sat around a sprawling slab of polished black granite. They pushed stacks of legal documents across the cold stone. The heavy parchment rustled. It was a dry, whispering sound that filled the sterile silence of the room. They were architects of ruin. They built cages out of contracts and clauses. Julian Vance sat at the head of the table. He looked invincible. His bespoke dove-gray suit hugged his broad shoulders, pulling taut across the chest as he leaned forward. He held a massive gold-plated Mont Blanc fountain pen. The nib hovered over a stack of crisp white paper. The room smelled of fresh ink and corporate execution. "The preemptive custody block is drafted," Harrison said. The lead attorney tapped a manicured finger against the top page. "We cite emotional instability and lack of financial resources. It bars her from crossing the county line with the unborn child." Julian signed his name. the gold nib scratched against the paper. "The eviction notice?" Julian asked. "Served at sunrise," Harrison confirmed. "The lease for the East Hollywood apartment is in your name alone. We executed the termination clause. The locks are already being drilled out." Julian flipped to the next document. "And the accounts?" "Frozen," Harrison replied. "The fabricated wire transfers triggered an automatic federal fraud hold. She cannot withdraw a single dollar. Her credit cards will decline. Her savings are locked. The police have the forged ledger." Julian smiled. He capped the fountain pen. The metal clicked. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sprawling grid of Los Angeles stretched toward the Pacific Ocean. He owned the skyline. He owned the narrative. He had severed the dead weight of a penniless kindergarten teacher and secured the DuPont empire in a single stroke. He stood up. "Bring the car around," Julian ordered. "I want to watch her drown." Across the city, his target suffered. The morning heat punished her. Serena Kensington gripped the steering wheel of her rusted Honda Civic. The cracked leather burned her palms. The air conditioning had failed 2 years ago, leaving the oppressive Los Angeles heat to bake the interior of the sedan, turning the small cabin into a suffocating oven. Traffic on the 101 freeway crawled at an agonizing pace. Brake lights bled into a river of red glass. Exhaust fumes leaked through the faulty air vents. The toxic air coated her tongue in a metallic film. She still wore the ruined cream silk maternity dress from the gala. Motor oil from the parking garage stained the fabric near her hip. The hem was torn, its delicate thread fraying against the rubber floor mats. She pressed her right hand against the 5-month swell of her belly. Aria rolled. The movement felt sluggish. The tiny limbs pushed against the uterine wall with exhausted, heavy effort. The baby had absorbed every spike of cortisol, every wave of terror, every ounce of the betrayal. "I have you," Serena whispered, her voice cracked. "I have you." She pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of her East Hollywood apartment complex. The transmission whined a high-pitched mechanical protest. She shifted the car into park. The engine shuddered. It died with a metallic clank. She stepped out into the glaring sunlight. The heat radiating off the pavement struck her face like an open palm. She closed her eyes. The physical weight of the exhaustion settled deep into her bones. She needed a shower. She needed a glass of cold water. She needed to lock the deadbolt and sleep for 3 days. She walked toward the outdoor stairwell. The iron railing flaked green paint onto her sweaty palms. The concrete steps smelled of boiled cabbage, stale cigarette smoke, and harsh industrial bleach. She climbed. Her knees ached. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain. She reached the 3rd-floor landing. Julian Vance stood in the shadows of the hallway. He wore his dove-gray suit. The morning light caught the sharp lines of his jaw. He stood motionless before the heavy wooden door of apartment 3B. The brass numbers reflected the harsh fluorescent bulb overhead. A sudden memory of Serena laughing in the small yellow kitchen flickered in his mind. He looked toward her door. He did not enter. He turned away. He followed the mistress instead. Chloe DuPont strutted out of the apartment. She wore a fitted crimson trench coat. Serena froze at the top of the stairs. The door to her apartment stood wide open. The deadbolt lay shattered. Brass shavings glittered against the cheap welcome mat. A woman walked out of the doorway carrying a large cardboard moving box. Rachel. Serena's lungs seized. The oxygen vanished from the hallway. Rachel was her co-teacher at the academy. Rachel had held her hair back during the brutal morning sickness of the first trimester. Rachel had purchased the very first baby item, a tiny yellow cotton onesie with a duck embroidered on the chest. Rachel stopped. The heavy cardboard box sagged against her hips. Inside the box, Serena saw the silver picture frame holding her 20-week ultrasound. She saw the stack of construction paper cutouts from her classroom. She saw the baby blanket her grandmother had knitted before passing away. "Rachel?" Serena breathed. The name scraped her raw throat. Rachel refused to meet her eyes. She stared at the flaking green paint of the iron railing. She shifted the weight of the box. The packing tape groaned. "What are you doing?" Serena asked. "He offered me the head of early education position." Rachel's voice trembled. Guilt thickened her words. "A $90,000 salary, Serena, a corner office in the West Wing. And he paid off my student loans this morning, every single cent." Serena stared at the woman she had called a sister. The betrayal cut deeper than the public humiliation at the gala. Julian was a scorpion. She expected him to sting. Rachel was family. "Julian owns the school board," Rachel justified. Her knuckles turned white against the cardboard. "He owns the principal. He said if I didn't pack your things and drill the locks, he would blacklist me from every private school in California. I have a mortgage. I have a mother in an assisted living facility. I couldn't go down with you." Rachel swallowed hard. "You were just a placeholder for him anyway," Rachel whispered. Rachel set the box down on the dirty linoleum. She turned her back. She walked away down the opposite stairwell. Her footsteps faded into the oppressive heat of the morning. Julian stepped out from the shadows of the open doorway. Harrison flanked him. The lead attorney held a thick manila envelope. The heavy red wax seal of Vance Holdings weighed down the flap. Harrison extended his arm. He pressed the stiff paper against Serena's chest. Serena did not take it. The envelope fell. It hit the linoleum with a dull slap. "Eviction notice," Julian stated. His voice sounded like grinding glass. "The lease was in my name alone. I terminated it. Your meager belongings are in the alley behind the dumpsters." Serena reached into her purse. Her fingers shook. She pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked in the corner. She tapped the Bank of America icon. The blue loading circle spun. The screen glowed white in the dim hallway. Checking account, $0. Savings account, $0. A thick red banner flashed across the top of the interface. "Account frozen, pending federal fraud investigation." The memory surfaced without warning. She is nothing but a nameless charity case who thought her womb was a lottery ticket. The vicious words rattled against her teeth. They carved themselves into the marrow of her bones. "You tried to wire $2 million to an offshore account in the Caymans last night," Julian lied. His tone was a smooth, venomous purr. "Harrison caught the transfer. The authorities have the forged ledger. If you try to fight me for custody of that child, I will have you arrested for felony embezzlement." Serena backed up. Her shoulder slammed into the peeling plaster of the hallway wall. She wrapped both arms around her belly. She curled her spine forward. She formed a physical cage of bone and muscle over her womb. Arya kicked, a frantic, sharp strike against the uterine wall. The baby felt the terror spiking in their shared blood. "Your health insurance is canceled," Julian continued. He paced closer. His leather shoes clicked against the floor. Your car is a rusted safety hazard parked on my private property. Look out the window." Serena turned her head. Through the grimy hallway glass, she saw a heavy commercial tow truck reversing into the parking lot. The yellow beacon lights flashed against the cracked asphalt. A man in overalls hooked thick steel chains to the front axle of her Honda Civic. The winch ground its gears. The rusted sedan was hoisted with a brutal jerk. The tires squealed. Chloe smiled. She stepped next to Julian. She adjusted the belt of her crimson coat. "A pregnant fraud with no car, no home, and no credit," Chloe sneered. "Have fun walking to the free clinic." Julian closed the remaining distance. He stopped 6 inches from Serena's face. He smelled of aged Macallan and mint. He looked down at her ruined dress. He looked at her oil-stained cheek. He looked at her shivering hands shielding her unborn child. "Look at yourself," Julian whispered. He drank in her suffering like fine wine. "You are stripped bare. You have no leverage. You have no power. You have nothing. You are nothing." He didn't wait for her to speak. He didn't want her voice. He turned his back. He offered his arm to Chloe. They descended the iron staircase. Their footsteps echoed in perfect, synchronized rhythm. They left her to drown in the suffocating silence of the empty hallway. Serena stood alone. The humidity of the Los Angeles morning pressed heavily against her lungs. She picked up her purse from the dirty floor. She left the manila envelope resting in the brass shavings. She walked down the 3 flights of stairs. Her legs felt hollow. Her knees shook with every agonizing step. She reached the corner of Sunset Boulevard. A rusted city bus bench sat beneath a flickering street lamp. The sun beat down on the metal. It turned the seat into a searing anvil. She sat down anyway. The heat burned through her torn silk dress. She opened her wallet. She pulled out a blue Visa credit card. She stood up and walked into the corner bodega. The bell chimed. The cramped space smelled of stale coffee, artificial cherry candy, and harsh ammonia floor wax. Fluorescent lights hummed. She walked to the back. Her hand trembled as she reached into the cooler, grasping a single plastic bottle of purified water. Condensation dripped onto her knuckles. She brought it to the register. She swiped the blue card. Declined. The machine beeped, a sharp, angry tone. The cashier scowled. He snatched the water bottle off the counter. Serena walked back outside. Her throat burned with severe dehydration. Her stomach knotted with a hollow, gnawing hunger. She sat back down on the blistering metal bench. She rested both hands on her belly. The steady, rhythmic thrum of Arya's heartbeat felt like the only real thing left in the entire world. She reached into the hidden pocket of her torn dress. Her fingers brushed a heavy, matte black cardstock. She pulled out the business card Marcus Reed had left on the concrete floor. The silver embossed numbers caught the harsh California sunlight. She unlocked her phone. She typed the 10 digits into the keypad. The exhaust from a passing city bus choked the stagnant air. She stared at the glowing green call button. The line began to ring. The glowing green call button connected. Before Serena could speak, a massive, jagged, tearing sensation ripped through her lower abdomen. The pain originated in the base of her spine. It wrapped around her waist like a rusted iron chain. It tightened against her organs. "Oh!" Her fingers spasmed. The cracked phone slipped from her sweat-slicked hand. It hit the blistering concrete sidewalk. The glass shattered. The screen went dark. She did not scream. She slumped forward against the scorching metal of the bus bench, both hands clamped over her belly. A warm, terrifying rush of fluid soaked through the torn cream silk of her maternity dress. The liquid pooled against the hot iron slats. It dripped a steady rhythm onto the baking pavement below, mixing with the dust and grime of the Los Angeles street corner. Commuters walked past. A woman in a tailored business suit looked away. A teenager wearing heavy headphones kept walking. Nobody stopped. Aria stopped kicking. The frantic, terrified fluttering inside her womb ceased. A heavy, suffocating silence settled inside her body. Panic turned her blood to ice water. The oppressive mid-morning heat vanished, replaced by a hard, involuntary shivering that rattled her jaw. She curled her spine forward. She pressed her chin against her chest. She formed a physical shield over her midsection, trying to protect the life suspended inside her failing body. "Please," Serena whispered. Her voice scraped against her parched throat. "Not yet!" Tires screeched against the asphalt. It was not the slow, heavy rumble of a city bus. A matte black private medical transport van slammed over the curb. The heavy rubber tires ground against the concrete, kicking up a cloud of gray dust. There were no hospital logos on the side panels. There were no colorful emergency stripes. The windows were tinted impenetrable black. The rear doors flew open before the vehicle stopped. Two men in dark, tactical paramedic uniforms sprinted across the sidewalk. They carried a reinforced titanium stretcher. They did not ask for her name. They did not ask for an insurance card. They did not carry clipboards demanding signatures. They moved with silent, synchronized precision. They lifted her onto the sterile padding. The metal rails clicked into place. The doors slammed shut. The siren did not wail. The driver navigated the congested grid of Sunset Boulevard with silent, lethal efficiency. Serena stared at the gray ceiling of the transport van. The vehicle smelled of sterile rubbing alcohol and fresh synthetic rubber. Every pothole sent a fresh wave of agony radiating through her pelvis. Her hands remained locked over her stomach. A medic strapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm. He did not speak. He just watched the glowing green numbers on his monitor. She thought about the rusted sedan impounded in the lot. She thought about Rachel carrying her belongings out in a cardboard box. They had stripped away her livelihood. They had stripped away her home. Now, her failing body threatened to strip away her child. The harsh, blinding, fluorescent lights of the Cedars Sinai Medical Center emergency bay blurred above her face. Wheels clattered hard against the polished linoleum. "Patient is 24 weeks, the lead paramedic shouted. He pushed the heavy stretcher through the swinging double doors of the trauma center. Placental abruption, fetal heart rate dropping. We need a trauma surgeon on standby." The emergency room buzzed with frantic energy. Doctors in blue scrubs parted. A hospital administrator in a tailored gray suit stepped into the corridor. He blocked the entrance of the VIP maternity wing. He held a flashing tablet. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking down at Serena with practiced bureaucratic disdain. "Halt the transport," the administrator stated. He raised his hand flat against the paramedic's chest. "Her profile is flagged. Federal fraud hold. Her primary insurance was canceled an hour ago by Vance Holdings. The account is frozen. We do not run a charity ward in this wing. Move her to the county hospital downtown." The stretcher jerked to a halt. Serena turned her head. The metal rail pressed into her bruised cheek. She watched the administrator swipe his finger across the tablet, dismissing her existence with a casual flick of his wrist. Her vision blurred at the edges. An older nurse stepped out from behind the pristine white intake desk. She wore crisp white scrubs. A small, discreet silver pin shaped like a lion's head crest rested on her lapel. She walked straight toward the administrator. Her rubber-soled shoes made zero noise on the linoleum. She bypassed the paramedics. She took the tablet from the administrator's hands. She reached into her pocket. She produced a heavy, matte black barcode card. She scanned the silver foil over the digital reader. The tablet chimed. A solid green light illuminated the corridor. "The patient's expenses are underwritten," the nurse said. Her voice carried no debate. "Room 412. Prepare surgical suite. A. Page. Dr. Aris right away." The administrator stepped aside. He stared at the flashing green approval code on his screen. He opened his mouth to argue, but the nurse had already turned her back. The nurse grabbed the rail of the stretcher. She looked down at Serena. Her eyes held a quiet, fierce loyalty. She placed her warm, steady hand over Serena's trembling, oil-stained fingers. "We have you, Miss Kensington," the nurse murmured. Julian looked toward the swinging double doors of the trauma center. He watched the nurses rush to her stretcher. He did not enter the surgical bay. He followed Chloe to the elevators instead. The operating room felt like a meat locker. Cold air blasted from massive overhead vents. It bit into Serena's bare arms, raising goosebumps along her skin. Surgical steel instruments clattered against metal trays. The sharp, sterile scent of iodine and heavy bleach burned her nostrils. 7 people moved around her in a coordinated blur of blue gowns and white masks. They tied her arms down to the crossboards. They draped a thick, blue, sterile sheet over her chest, blocking her view of her own body. Serena stared up at the massive circular surgical lights. The bulbs reflected sharp and clear in the polished chrome fixtures. She pressed her chin down against her collarbone. She refused to close her eyes. She refused to surrender to the terror threatening to drown her. Julian had wanted her broken. Julian had wanted her begging on the street. The scalpel sliced. The pressure felt like a heavy, blunt object dragging across her lower stomach. The anesthesiologist adjusted the clear plastic mask over her nose and mouth. The oxygen tasted like dry plastic. She focused on the rhythmic, electronic beeping of the fetal heart monitor. The tempo slowed. The space between the electronic blips stretched into an agonizing eternity. The nurse with the silver pin stood by Serena's head. She smoothed a cool, damp cloth over the battered cheekbone where the parking garage concrete had bruised the skin. She held Serena's restrained hand. "Hold on," the nurse whispered. A wet, heavy suctioning sound echoed through the sterile room. Then came the cry. It sounded like a frantic, desperate gasp ripping through a fragile paper membrane. It was tiny. It was raw. It was the most magnificent noise Serena had ever heard. The newborn weighed barely 2 pounds. Her skin was a mottled, translucent purple, coated in thick white vernix. She radiated a damp, heavy heat against the chill of the operating room. Her tiny fists flailed in the cold air. She fought the sudden expanse of the outside world with a stubborn, furious energy. Serena let out a breath she had been holding for 5 months. A single tear broke free. It tracked through the dried motor oil on her cheek and disappeared into her hairline. The chaotic operating room faded. Hours passed in a blur. The VIP recovery room was buried in quiet. Thick, blackout curtains shielded the floor-to-ceiling windows from the punishing afternoon sun. A single amber reading light cast a soft glow over the stark white hospital bed. The walls were painted a soothing cream. The floors were polished mahogany, far removed from the sterile linoleum of the emergency bay. Serena sat propped against 3 firm pillows. She wore a pristine white hospital gown. The heavy intravenous lines taped to her left hand delivered a steady stream of fluids and painkillers. Her right arm rested over her chest. "Ho!" Arya lay enclosed in a specialized, temperature-controlled transport incubator stationed flush against the mattress. The machine was a marvel of modern medicine. It was a clear acrylic womb designed to sustain life. Tiny blue light therapy panels glowed above the mattress. Oxygen tubing snaked around Arya's delicate face. The nurse had allowed 3 minutes of skin-to-skin contact before the wires and monitors had to be reattached. The tiny girl wore a miniature white cotton cap. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, bird-like flutters. She smelled of sterile saline and pure, uncorrupted life. The translucent skin over her ribs showed the frantic, rapid beating of her heart. Serena rested her chin against the top of the plastic incubator. She traced the minuscule curve of Arya's ear through the access port. The memory surfaced. It hung in the quiet shadows of the room. Serena tightened her hold on the fragile plastic casing resting against her ribs. She felt the steady, determined pulse of the machinery keeping her daughter alive. The venom of Julian's words no longer held any power. They were replaced by a cold, calculated clarity. She closed her eyes. The elevator bell chimed down the corridor. "I do not care about your sanitary protocols." Chloe DuPont's voice sliced through the tranquil hush of the maternity ward. The sound was harsh, amplified, and dripping with entitlement. The sharp tone shattered the peaceful, healing environment of the floor. "We are Vance Holdings," Chloe shouted. The heavy clacking of her diamond choker echoed down the hallway. "And I am not putting on a cheap paper gown over a custom-tailored coat." Chloe marched past the central nurse's station. She wore a bright, blood-red silk trench coat. The aggressive color violated the soft pastels and clinical whites of the healing space. The heavy heels of her designer boots slammed against the wood flooring. She waved a manicured hand at a passing orderly, demanding a cappuccino with almond milk. She tapped her long red acrylic nails against the polished intake desk. She demanded to speak to the chief of medicine. She wanted the custody papers processed fast so they could attend a dinner reservation in Beverly Hills. She complained about the smell of antiseptics ruining her perfume. Julian walked a few paces behind her. He wore his bespoke dove gray suit, his jaw locked. The vein along his temple rose visible beneath his skin. He held a thick manila envelope stamped with a heavy red wax seal. The legal documents detailed the emergency custody transfer. They required only a signature from the hospital administrator to take effect. He carried the envelope like a weapon. He expected to find Serena weeping. He expected to find her broken, begging the medical staff for a payment plan she could never afford. Julian stood outside the heavy wooden door of room 412. The silent nurse stepped into his path. Julian stopped. He did not recognize her. He saw only a woman in white scrubs blocking his exit. He assumed she was another disposable employee of the hospital. "Give her this," Julian ordered. He shoved the manila envelope against the nurse's chest. "It is a preemptive custody order. The child requires advanced NICU care she cannot finance. Vance Holdings is assuming full medical guardianship. She has 24 hours to vacate the premises. The nurse took the envelope. She did not glance at the heavy wax seal stamping the flap. She looked straight into Julian's arrogant eyes, cataloging the bespoke cut of his dove-gray suit and the impatient tightness of his jaw. She said nothing. Julian adjusted his French cuffs. He turned his back. He walked down the corridor, following the aggressive trail of the red silk coat. He did not look back. He believed he had won. The wooden door to room 412 clicked open. The nurse stepped inside. The chaotic noise of the hallway vanished as the heavy doors sealed the room once more. She walked to the foot of the bed. She placed the manila envelope face down on the rolling tray table. The red wax seal broke against the plastic surface. Serena did not look at the legal document. She did not ask what Julian wanted. She did not ask about the threats. She kept her eyes locked on Arya. The incubator hummed a low, steady vibration. The IV line dripped. The heavy hospital machinery monitored every breath. Serena brought her left hand up, resting it gently against the warm plastic casing. She formed a physical cage of bone and muscle around her child. Her chin rose. She guarded the Kensington air in the quiet shadows of the room. The air grew heavy. She waited for the storm. Time crawled forward. Shadows lengthened across the floor. Midnight swallowed the cedars. Sinai VIP maternity wing. The sprawling suite sat in heavy, suffocating silence. Thick blackout curtains shielded the floor-to-ceiling windows from the neon glow of the Los Angeles skyline. The air smelled of sterile saline and expensive starched linen. A single amber reading lamp burned in the corner. It cast long, distorted shadows across the polished mahogany floor. Serena Kensington sat rigid in the stark white hospital bed. She wore a pristine linen gown provided by the private nursing staff. Her right hand rested flat against her deflated abdomen, the phantom weight of the child she had carried still echoing in her muscles. Her bare shoulders shivered under the cold blast of the overhead air conditioning. She did not reach for the thermal blanket folded at the foot of her mattress. She welcomed the chill. It kept her awake. It kept her sharp. A manila envelope rested face down on her rolling tray table. The thick parchment carried the lethal weight of Vance Holdings. The heavy red wax seal lay shattered against the gray plastic surface, broken by the silent nurse hours ago. The custody transfer documents spilled from the opening. The typed black ink demanded the surrender of her child. Julian had ordered her execution. He had frozen her bank accounts, orchestrated her public humiliation, and manufactured a criminal embezzlement charge just to ensure she could never fight back. He expected her to fold. He expected her to weep into her hands and sign away her flesh and blood to a corporate entity. She stared at the fraudulent papers, her jaw locked. The vein along her temple throbbed a steady, brutal rhythm against her skin. She turned her head away from the legal threat. She looked at the clear acrylic transport incubator stationed flush against her mattress. Arya breathed. The rhythmic hiss-click of the miniature ventilator filled the quiet room. Tiny blue phototherapy panels glowed above the mattress, washing the newborn in a surreal, aquatic light. Arya weighed barely 2 pounds. Her skin was a translucent, mottled purple. The fragile network of veins across her ribcage showed the frantic, rapid beating of her tiny heart. A specialized breathing mask swallowed her minuscule nose and mouth. A maze of clear plastic tubing snaked around her delicate face, delivering life-saving oxygen to lungs too underdeveloped to function alone. Serena shifted her weight. The heavy intravenous lines taped to the back of her left hand pulled taut. She ignored the sting of the steel needle. She leaned over the heavy metal bed rail. She pressed her right palm flat against the warm, vibrating plastic of the incubator. She formed a physical barrier between her daughter and the dark room. "I have you," Serena whispered. Her voice scraped her raw throat. She traced the minuscule curve of Arya's ear through the circular access port. The baby's chest, no larger than a teacup, rose and fell in rapid, bird-like flutters. Arya wore a miniature white cotton cap. The fabric dwarfed her fragile skull. She was a fighter. She had survived the massive spike of cortisol. She had survived the placental abruption. She had survived the terrifying birth on a stainless steel operating table. Serena stroked the acrylic casing. The terror of the morning faded. A cold, crystalline focus replaced the panic in her veins. Julian Vance believed he owned the board. He believed he had stripped her bare. He was a fool. Serena looked past the incubator toward the heavy ivory landline resting on the bedside table. The coiled cord vanished into the wall. A small red message, light, blinked on the base. 3 years ago, she had packed 2 modest suitcases and walked out of the wrought iron gates of the Kensington estate. She had traded the security of a $3 billion dynasty for a walk-up apartment in East Hollywood. She wanted a man to look at her and see a partner, not a trust fund. She chose a parasite instead. She had built a fragile, glass-walled life on a foundation of $50,000 a year. She had allowed Chloe DuPont to parade around in blood-red Valentino gowns, wielding leveraged debt like a broadsword. She had stood in the Crystal Conservatory and absorbed the venom of 500 millionaires who thought she was a nameless charity case. She had been wrong. Humility had not bought her love. It had bought her destruction. The illusion of a self-made life had nearly cost her the life of her child. She reached across the white sheets. Her trembling fingers hovered over the heavy ivory receiver. The memory of Julian's voice crawled out of the dark corners of the hospital room. The malicious syllables rattled against her teeth. He had stood in his Wilshire penthouse, swirling aged Macallan in a crystal tumbler, mocking the cheap cream dress she wore. He had sneered at her modest salary. He had handed her life over to Chloe DuPont just to secure a real estate merger. Serena's hand stopped shaking. Her fingers curled around the cold plastic of the handset. She lifted the receiver from the cradle. The dial tone hummed a flat, continuous electronic note in her ear. She raised her chin. She did not need a $50,000 salary. She did not need Rachel's hollow friendship. She did not need the approval of the Elite Parents Association. She carried the Kensington bloodline in her veins. Theodore Kensington had forged a global empire from dirt and grit. He had built the very walls Julian Vance used to humiliate her. Her grandfather crushed men like Julian before breakfast. She punched a 10-digit number into the keypad. She had not dialed the sequence in over 1,000 days. She did not need to check a contact list. Muscle memory guided her thumb. The heavy, matte black card Marcus Reed had left on the parking garage floor remained tucked inside her ruined dress, but she did not need it now. This was not a call to security. This was a call to the throne. The line clicked. It rang once. It rang twice. The sterile, suffocating quiet of the hospital room pressed against her eardrums. The ventilator hissed. The blue lights over Arya's bed flickered. A heavy click stopped the ringing. The connection opened. A rush of static hissed through the speaker, followed by the faint, muffled crackle of a vinyl record playing in the background. The low, mournful notes of a cello bled through the phone line. The man on the other end did not speak. He did not ask who was calling. He demanded identification through his silence alone. Serena closed her eyes. The scent of roasted truffles and white tiger orchids from the gala felt like a lifetime ago. She tasted the lingering copper of her own bitten lip. "Grandpa!" Her voice broke. The single word cracked down the middle, heavy with 3 years of stubborn pride and crushing regret. The cello music in the background stopped. A needle dragged across vinyl with a sharp screech. A heavy, ragged breath vibrated through the earpiece. "Serena!" The name sounded like grinding stone. It carried the immense, crushing weight of old money and ruthless authority. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms, dismantled hedge funds, and dictated the futures of thousands. But beneath the granite exterior, a frantic, desperate relief cracked the syllable. Serena pressed the receiver harder against her ear. The hard plastic bruised her cartilage. She leaned forward, bowing her head over her knees. The sterile white hospital gown pooled around her waist. "It's me," Serena whispered. A single tear escaped her lashes. It fell onto the crisp white bedsheet. "I need you." She waited for the lecture. She braced for the reprimand. "Wait!" She expected him to remind her of the day she dragged her suitcases down the gravel driveway, refusing his money, refusing his protection, demanding to live on her own terms. She expected him to demand an apology for the silence. The old man did not demand an apology. "I know," Theodore Kensington rasped. The gravel in his tone sharpened into cold, forged steel. "I never stopped watching over you." Serena released a jagged breath. Her lungs expanded for the first time in 24 hours. "Julian Vance," she started. "Do not waste your breath on a dead man," her grandfather interrupted. The promise of violence hummed beneath his quiet words. "The nurse sent the hospital coordinates." Serena looked up at the ceiling. The amber light caught the moisture on her cheeks. "I need to come home. I am already here." The line went dead. A sharp dial tone echoed in her ear. Serena lowered the ivory receiver. She placed it back onto the cradle. The plastic clicked into place. The small red message light stopped blinking. The suffocating pressure in her chest vanished. The towering, insurmountable threats of Vance Holdings, the forged embezzlement ledgers, the eviction notices, the frozen bank accounts, they all dissolved into ash. Julian thought he had backed a penniless kindergarten teacher into a corner. He had no idea he had just cornered the sole heir to a $3 billion dynasty. She wiped the single tear from her cheek. She reached out and touched the warm acrylic of the transport incubator. Arya shifted under the blue phototherapy lights. The tiny infant kicked a purple heel against the plastic mattress. It was a strong, defiant movement. Serena looked down at her daughter. The corners of Serena's mouth twitched. The movement felt foreign. It pulled at the bruised, swollen skin of her cheekbone. She pushed past the pain. Her lips curved upward. For the first time since the mahogany stage lights blinded her at the gala, Serena smiled. It was not a gentle, motherly expression. It was a terrifying, brilliant exposure of teeth. It was the smile of a queen reclaiming her crown. It was the promise of unmitigated ruin for the man who had ordered her destruction. She sat back against the pillows. She adjusted the crisp white hospital sheets over her lap. She folded her hands together. She waited. Down the long, sterile corridor of the VIP maternity wing, the heavy silence broke. Footsteps echoed against the polished mahogany floor. Slow, deliberate, heavy, the synchronized rhythm of leather soles marching in flawless unison vibrated through the walls. It was not the frantic scurry of nurses in rubber shoes. It was the precise, measured cadence of men who brought the storm with them. The footsteps grew louder. They passed the central intake desk. They bypassed the sterile supply closets. They stopped outside room 412. A shadow eclipsed the narrow rectangular glass of her hospital door. The heavy brass door handle clicked. The mahogany door swung inward. It did not creak. It yielded instantly to the force behind it. 12 men stepped into the sterile white room. They moved with synchronized predatory grace. They wore identical charcoal black tailored suits. Their heavy leather tactical Oxfords absorbed the sound of their footfalls against the polished wood floor. They did not look at Serena. They fanned out across the VIP maternity suite. 2 men secured the floor-to-ceiling blackout curtains. 2 men flanked the doorway. 1 man locked the deadbolt. The remaining 7 formed a silent, impenetrable semicircle around the clear acrylic transport incubator. They formed a wall of bespoke wool and concealed firearms. They were the Kensington Vanguard. Theodore Kensington walked through the parted sea of guards. The founder and chairman of the Kensington Private School Network commanded the room without raising his voice. He wore a masterfully tailored 3-piece midnight blue suit cut from vicuña wool. A solid gold Patek Philippe watch rested against his left wrist. His silver hair was cut with military precision. His posture held the rigid, unyielding architecture of a man who bent global markets to his will. He did not look like a grieving grandfather. He looked like an executioner. He stopped at the foot of the hospital bed. Serena sat propped against the pillows in her pristine white hospital gown. Her right hand remained flat against the warm plastic of the incubator. She did not cry. She met his gaze. The silence between them stretched. 3 years of estrangement dissolved in the sterile air of the hospital room. No apologies were offered. No tears were shed. They were forged from the same titanium bloodline. Theodore lowered his chin, a microscopic nod, an acknowledgement of her survival. He turned his attention to the heavy medical machinery humming beside her mattress. He stepped closer. The intricate maze of clear plastic tubing and blue phototherapy lights washed his sharp features in a surreal, aquatic glow. He looked down through the circular access port. Arya breathed. The tiny chest rose and fell in rapid, fragile flutters beneath the miniature white cotton cap. The 2-pound infant kicked her purple heel against the mattress. It was a defiant, stubborn strike. Theodore rested his large, calloused hand flat against the acrylic casing, mere inches from Serena's trembling fingers. The gold Patek Philippe caught the ambient amber light. "She has your mother's fighting spirit," Theodore murmured. His voice was a low, vibrating rumble that resonated in the hollow space of the room. "And my temper." Serena swallowed the lump in her throat. "Her name is Arya." "Arya Kensington," Theodore corrected. He did not whisper the name. He cemented it into the foundation of the room. He turned away from the incubator. The grandfather vanished, the billionaire chairman taking his place. He snapped his fingers. The sound cracked like a whip. The suite transformed into a war room. A man in a slate gray suit stepped forward from the shadows near the door. He held an encrypted satellite tablet. 4 Phantom units are holding the perimeter downstairs, sir, the operative reported. His voice was devoid of inflection. The hospital administrator has been permanently relieved of his duties. Our medical team has assumed control of the floor. The accounts, Theodore demanded. Federal fraud hold reversed, the operative stated, swiping a finger across the glowing glass. I woke the regional director of Bank of America 10 minutes ago. He personally purged the fabricated ledgers. The East Hollywood apartment building was purchased by Kensington Holdings 5 minutes ago. The eviction is void. Serena touched her deflated belly, feeling the phantom ache of the placental abruption, anchoring herself to the reality unfolding before her. The crushing weight of Julian's meticulously designed cage was evaporating into thin air. Vance Holdings, Theodore commanded. Another operative stepped forward. He placed a thick, leather-bound dossier onto the rolling tray table. He set it directly on top of the shattered red wax seal of Julian's custody documents. We are executing a hostile sweep of his corporate debt, the second man said. He leveraged Vance Holdings to secure the DuPont real estate merger. We are buying the debt through 3 shell corporations. By sunrise, Kensington Holdings will be his primary creditor. We can call the loans and bankrupt him before the stock market opens. Theodore buttoned the center button of his midnight blue jacket. He stared at the closed mahogany door. Do not bankrupt him in the dark. Theodore's eyes hardened into polished obsidian. I want him to look at the woman he tried to destroy when the floor drops out from under his feet. The encrypted radio on the lead guard's lapel clicked. A short burst of static hissed into the room. Target is approaching the suite, a voice relayed through the earpiece. He is carrying the secondary custody forms. He demands entry. Theodore looked at Serena. She sat rigid against her 3 firm pillows. Her chin stayed elevated. Her left hand remained tangled in the heavy intravenous lines. Her right hand stayed anchored to the incubator, protecting Arya from the impending storm. Let him in, Theodore ordered. The 2 guards flanking the doorway stepped aside. The operative unlocked the deadbolt. The heavy brass mechanism clicked. Julian Vance pushed the mahogany door open. He strode into the room. He wore his bespoke dove-gray suit, the jacket unbuttoned, his silk tie slightly loosened. He carried a fresh manila folder under his left arm. He exuded the suffocating arrogance of a man who believed he held the leash to the universe. He stopped. The air trapped in his lungs stalled. 12 massive men in identical charcoal black suits stared back at him. They formed an impenetrable, semicircular wall around the white hospital bed. Their hands rested over the subtle bulges beneath their tailored jackets. The room smelled of fresh, sterile saline, expensive leather, and imminent violence. Julian's eyes darted across the room. He cataloged the earpieces. He noted the hostile stances. He looked at the shattered red wax seal of his previous custody documents sitting on the rolling tray table, now pinned beneath a heavy leather dossier. His arrogant smirk returned. It was a fragile, practiced muscle memory. What is this? Julian scoffed. He gestured toward the wall of men. Did you drain your pitiful savings account to hire private security, Serena? Did you max out a credit card to stage a theatrical protest? Serena kept her silence. Her gaze remained hollow, pitying, and fixed on his face. She did not shrink into the pillows. She sat with the quiet, devastating poise of a queen watching a jester dance. "You have 24 hours to vacate this wing," Julian dictated. He stepped forward. The lead guard shifted his weight, blocking Julian's path to the bed. Julian sneered at the operative. "Tell your rent-a-cops to stand down. I am the CEO of Vance Holdings. I have a court-ordered preemptive custody block. This child is a liability I am taking off her hands." He raised the fresh manila folder. He slapped it against the palm of his free hand. "Sign the papers, Serena," Julian demanded. His voice echoed against the blackout curtains. "Or I will have the police haul you out of here in handcuffs for the embezzlement charges I told you this morning. You are stripped bare. You have nothing." Theodore Kensington stepped out from behind the wall of guards. Julian froze. The older man moved with the slow, terrifying gravity of an apex predator. The overhead amber light caught the silver in his hair and the sharp, unyielding angles of his jaw. He stopped 2 feet away from Julian. He did not look at the manila folder. He looked straight into Julian's eyes. "You are standing in my hospital," Theodore stated. The syllables hit the floor like iron anvils. Julian blinked. His smirk faltered. He looked at the vicuña wool suit. He looked at the solid gold Patek Philippe watch. He recognized the specific, unteachable posture of generational wealth. A cold bead of sweat formed at the base of his neck. "Who are you?" Julian demanded. The commanding boom of his voice thinned. It cracked at the edges. "You filed fraudulent embezzlement ledgers with a federal bank," Theodore continued. He ignored the question. He stepped closer. The scent of aged Macallan on Julian's breath clashed with the crisp, clean scent of Theodore's imported bergamot cologne. "You terminated my bloodline from an academy bearing my name. You attempted to steal a child. You do not want to secure a merger you cannot afford." Julian backed up half a step. The heavy leather tactical Oxfords of the guards shifted in unison. The sound was a unified, ominous scrape against the mahogany floor. "I asked who you are," Julian repeated. He tightened his grip on the folder. The thick parchment crumpled beneath his manicured fingers. Theodore Kensington reached out. He snatched the manila folder from Julian's hand. Julian did not resist. He let the papers go. Theodore dropped the folder onto the floor. He stepped on it. The heavy leather sole of his shoe ground the Vance Holdings crest into the polished wood. "You dared to publicly banish my granddaughter and my great-grandchild from the very empire I built for them." The words sucked the oxygen out of the room. Julian stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face. His skin turned the color of wet ash. He looked past Theodore's shoulder. He stared at Serena. She sat in the stark white bed. The cheap cream silk dress from the gala was gone. The rusted Honda Civic was gone. The $50,000 salary was a phantom. She did not look like a broken, penniless kindergarten teacher. She looked like the undisputed heir to a $3 billion dynasty. Her hand remained flat against the incubator, shielding Arya. Her chin stayed high. Her silence slaughtered him. "Granddaughter," Julian whispered. The word snagged on his teeth. He felt the phantom weight of the DuPont real estate merger crumbling in his hands. He remembered the rusted walk-up apartment. He remembered the yellow nursery paint. He remembered laughing at her meager savings account. He had spent 3 years building a psychological cage around a woman who owned the ground he walked on. The memory surfaced without warning. She is nothing but a nameless charity case who thought her womb was a lottery ticket. The memory of his own gloating voice echoed in his mind. The sickening realization twisted his stomach into violent knots. Theodore leaned in. The older man's eyes were black voids of absolute ruin. "My granddaughter never needed your money," Theodore whispered. The quiet tone was deadlier than a scream. "She was testing your character. You failed." Julian's jaw slacked. His bespoke dove-gray suit felt like a straitjacket. The walls of the Cedars-Sinai VIP suite closed in around him. He looked at the operative holding the encrypted tablet. He realized they weren't hospital security. They were a corporate execution squad. He remembered the 4 black Rolls-Royce Phantoms parked downstairs, idling in the emergency bay. He had walked right past them. "The DuPont merger," Julian stammered. His eyes darted wildly toward the heavy leather dossier sitting on the tray table. The panic hijacked his vocal cords. "You cannot interfere with Vance Holdings. I have ironclad contracts." "Vance Holdings no longer exists," Theodore informed him. The billionaire chairman turned his back on the broken man. He walked toward the hospital bed. He stood beside Serena, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "A unified front of Kensington blood." "I bought your debt at a premium 20 minutes ago," Theodore said without looking back. "I called the loans. Your board of directors is currently holding an emergency vote to strip you of your title. Chloe DuPont's father pulled out of the merger the moment he saw my name on the hostile takeover filings." Julian stumbled backward. His shoulder slammed against the heavy mahogany door. His hands shook. The flawless, arrogant CEO who had stood on a wooden stage and orchestrated a public execution was gone. He was a hollow shell, drowning in the catastrophic wake of his own greed. He patted his pockets. He pulled out his platinum phone. His thumbs smeared sweat across the cracked glass. He opened his email. 52 unread urgent messages. Margin calls, contract terminations, board resignations. He opened his banking app. A thick red banner flashed across the top of the interface. Account frozen. Federal investigation pending. He stared at the glowing white screen. The exact weapon he had used to bankrupt Serena had just been turned against his own chest. The karma was immediate. It was lethal. Julian looked up. Serena watched him. Her eyes offered no forgiveness. She did not gloat. She did not scream. She simply removed her right hand from the incubator and placed it over Theodore's hand resting on her shoulder. The image of the billionaire founder and his sole heir standing guard over the next generation burned itself into Julian's retinas. Julian's phone slipped from his trembling fingers. "Yeah!" It hit the polished wood floor. The ground collapsed beneath him. 2 days later, the scene reset. The stage awaited its final act. The Crystal Conservatory at Kensington Academy sparkled under the Los Angeles night sky. The vaulted glass ceiling reflected the same distant stars. The 3-tiered crystal chandeliers cast sharp, prismatic light across the imported Italian marble floors. Everything mirrored the spring gala, everything except the temperature. The air conditioning hummed a freezing, relentless drone. The towering swan eye sculptures had melted into deformed, weeping blocks of slush resting in silver basins. The room smelled of oxidized silver, wilting white tiger orchids, and suffocating terror. 500 millionaires sat in rows of gilded wooden chairs. The same tech founders, the same neurosurgeons, the same wives draped in couture gowns who had laughed 48 hours ago. They did not hold crystal flutes of Dom Perignon. They held their breath. They kept their hands folded in their laps. Serena Kensington sat at the front of the room. She occupied a high-backed crimson velvet armchair stationed at the base of the raised mahogany stage. She wore a bespoke white wool crepe dress, the heavy fabric draped loosely over her heeling midsection. Her right hand rested flat against the soft, deflated curve of her abdomen. Her body mapped the traumatic absence of the child ripped from her womb. Her left hand gripped an encrypted titanium tablet. The screen displayed a live, high-definition feed of the Cedars Sinai VIP NICU. Aria breathed inside the acrylic transport incubator. The tiny 2-pound chest rose and fell beneath the harsh blue phototherapy lights. A maze of clear plastic tubing snaked around the infant's fragile, translucent jaw. Aria kicked a miniature purple heel against the mattress. The movement anchored Serena's heartbeat to the sterile hospital room miles away. Theodore Kensington stood behind her chair. The founder and chairman wore a masterfully tailored midnight blue suit cut from vicuña wool. His hands rested on the carved wooden back of Serena's chair. He did not move. He did not speak. His presence alone generated a gravitational pull that crushed the oxygen out of the conservatory. 12 identical operatives in charcoal black suits lined the perimeter of the glass walls. Marcus Reed stood by the heavy oak double doors. The head of security kept his massive hands folded behind his back. He guarded the only exit. Julian Vance and Chloe DuPont sat in the center of the front row. A 10-foot radius of empty gilded chairs isolated them from the rest of the wealthy patrons. Julian wore the same bespoke dove gray suit from the hospital. The silk tie hung loose around his collar. The fabric wrinkled around his waist. He smelled of stale sweat and panic. Chloe wore a blood-red Valentino silk blouse. She sat rigid. The heavy diamond choker rested against her collarbone. The stones did not clink. Elias Thorne stepped into the spotlight. The lead corporate counsel for Kensington Holdings climbed the wooden stairs. He stood on the exact spot Julian had occupied 2 nights prior. Elias wore a razor-sharp black suit. He carried a thick leather-bound binder. He placed the heavy book onto the wooden podium. He pressed a button on a silver remote. A massive white canvas projector screen unrolled from the ceiling beams. The canvas snapped taut. The high-definition footage from Marcus Reed's hidden lapel camera flooded the room. The video stretched 20 feet wide. Julian's face loomed over the crowd. The audio hissed through the surrounding speakers. Julian's recorded voice boomed off the glass walls. "We do not expect them to harbor deceit. We do not expect them to be moral failures." The 500 millionaires watched themselves. Wives recoiled from the screen as they saw their own faces twisted in mockery. Husbands stared at the marble floor. The tech founder's wife, who had scoffed at Serena, now bit her lip until a drop of blood welled against the skin. They witnessed their own complicity broadcast in inescapable clarity. The footage showed Serena standing alone in her cheap cream dress. It showed her hands shielding her belly. It showed her walking away down the long, empty aisle of polished white marble. The screen went black. Elias opened the leather binder. The thick parchment pages rustled. The sound mimicked a knife sharpening on a whetstone. Elias read from the transcript. "She is nothing but a nameless charity case who thought her womb was a lottery ticket." Serena lifted her chin. She looked past Elias. She locked her gaze onto Julian's hollow, bloodshot eyes. "Tell me, who has nothing now?" For 3 seconds, absolute silence crushed the room, the freezing air conditioning pressing against Julian's skin like heavy lead. Julian flinched. The muscles in his neck spasmed. He opened his mouth to speak, but the dry click of his tongue produced no sound. He grasped the armrests of his gilded chair. Footsteps clicked down the center marble aisle. Rachel walked out from the sea of seated billionaires. The co-teacher wore a wrinkled beige cardigan. Her shoulders shook. She clutched a shredded tissue in her fist. She stopped 3 feet from Serena's velvet chair. She refused to look at Theodore Kensington. The billionaire's shadow terrified her. "He threatened my career." Rachel choked on her own saliva. Tears spilled over her cheeks, cutting tracks through her foundation. "He promised me the head of early education position. He paid off my student loans in full. He made me drill the locks on your apartment door." Rachel dropped to her knees. The impact cracked against the marble. "I packed your grandmother's blanket into a cardboard box." Rachel pressed her forehead toward the floor. "I left you in that hallway. I traded my sister for a corner office." Serena looked at the weeping woman. She remembered the nausea of her first trimester. She remembered Rachel holding her hair back over the staff bathroom sink. She remembered the tiny yellow cotton onesie with the embroidered duck. Serena did not reach out her hand. She did not offer absolution. Her right hand stayed anchored to her healing belly. Her left hand held the tablet keeping Arya safe. She gave Rachel nothing but the heavy, crushing weight of silence. Rachel sobbed. She crawled backward. She stood up and retreated into the shadows of the conservatory, her face buried in her hands. The room absorbed her crushing confession. Elias tapped the silver remote. "What?" The massive projector screen flickered back to life. A new timestamp glowed in the bottom corner. Yesterday morning, 8:15 in the morning. The footage showed the waiting room of a private Beverly Hills fertility clinic. The walls were painted a soft, unassuming pink. Chloe DuPont stood at the reception desk. She wore her crimson trench coat. She pulled a thick stack of $100 bills from her designer handbag. She slid the banded cash across the counter. A young, terrified receptionist handed her a sealed medical envelope in return. A man in a white medical coat stood up from the front row of the conservatory. Dr. Evans adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He faced the crowd. "Miss DuPont is a patient at my clinic." The doctor smoothed his tie. "She purchased a falsified positive pregnancy blood panel. The results belong to a surrogate carrying twins. Miss DuPont has a copper IUD currently implanted. She cannot conceive." The medical truth silenced the crowd. The audio from the hospital corridor flooded Serena's memory. Chloe had stood in the maternity ward demanding a cappuccino, claiming she needed a real heir. She had built her throne on a manufactured lie. Julian rotated his neck. The bones ground together. The muscles in his jaw slackened, the rigid mask of arrogance sliding off his face to reveal the hollow, panicked void underneath. His chest stopped moving. Chloe stared straight ahead at the mahogany stage. The heavy diamonds at her throat remained motionless against her collarbone. Her silence convicted her. Marcus Reed stood by the oak doors. He documented the collapse of the DuPont empire. He watched Julian realize the woman he destroyed his life for was a phantom. The betrayal closed its karmic circle. Julian had traded Serena's genuine devotion for a barren transaction. An older man in a charcoal pinstripe suit stood up from the third row. Arthur DuPont, the patriarch of the DuPont family board. He leaned on a silver-tipped cane. The rubies on his family signet ring caught the chandelier light. He looked down at his niece sitting in the front row. "You are no longer a DuPont," the patriarch delivered his final judgment. Arthur turned his back. He walked down the center aisle. His cane clicked a steady, rhythmic march against the marble. Marcus Reed opened the heavy oak door. Arthur stepped out into the Los Angeles night. The brass handle clicked shut behind him. Chloe closed her eyes. The blood drained from her face. Her leveraged debt, her family name, her social influence vanished in a single sentence. She was a ghost occupying a red silk blouse. Julian pushed himself up from the gilded chair. His knees wobbled. His dove-gray suit hung loose on his frame. He had lost the merger. He had lost his company. He had lost the Kensington bloodline. He had lost the fake DuPont heir. "Serena!" Julian stepped toward the velvet armchair. Theodore Kensington shifted his weight, but Serena raised her left index finger a fraction of an inch. Theodore halted. The four operatives remained statues. "Serena, please." Julian dragged his leather shoe across the marble. "I was manipulated. The Vance Holdings board pressured me into the merger. Chloe lied to me. You saw the tape. She deceived me." The tech founder in the second row pulled his phone from his pocket. He checked his email. "I was protecting you from the corporate media." Julian waved his hands. His voice pitched higher. Desperation bled into his tone. "We can fix this. I can annul the contracts. We can go back to the apartment." The neurosurgeon's wife leaned over and whispered a dinner recipe to the woman sitting next to her. "Look at me!" Julian shouted. The sound bounced off the glass ceiling. Nobody looked. The 500 millionaires resumed a low, ambient murmur. Waiters emerged from the side kitchens carrying silver trays of fresh iced water. A photographer packed his lenses into a canvas bag, zipping the compartments shut. The room operated around Julian as if he were a piece of discarded furniture. Julian stepped closer to the velvet chair. He reached his hand out. Serena did not flinch. She did not yell for security. She looked down at the encrypted tablet in her left hand. Arya shifted under the blue light. The newborn kicked her tiny leg against the plastic boundary of the incubator. She was alive. She was breathing. The Kensington heir fought for every inch of space in the world. Serena traced the image of her daughter's face through the glass screen. She remembered the cold parking garage floor. She remembered the grout line pressing into her bruised cheek. She remembered the exact metallic taste of blood when she swallowed her scream. The heavy silver microphone stand from the gala still sat at the edge of the stage. Julian backed away, his heel catching on its coiled wire and sending him stumbling to his knees. The fabric of his tailored trousers tore against the stone. "Please," his voice fractured into a pathetic, wet sob. He begged the marble floor. He begged the silent air. He begged a woman who no longer existed. Serena lowered the tablet. She placed her right hand over her left, guarding the image of her child. She planted her heels on the floor. She stood up from the throne. Serena stood up from the velvet throne. The heavy crimson fabric released her with a soft, brushing sigh. The air conditioning venting from the vaulted glass ceiling blasted across the mahogany stage, but she did not shiver. She stood tall in her bespoke white wool crepe dress. The fabric draped in thick, protective folds over her healing midsection. Julian remained on the floor. He had dragged his body off the cold Italian marble, crawling forward until his knees sank into the edge of the crimson carpet runner. The stiff, woven fibers of the rug burned his skin through the thin wool of his trousers. The physical ache anchored him to the nightmare unfolding around him. He lowered his head. He stared at the polished toes of Theodore Kensington's heavy leather Oxfords. The billionaire founder did not move. He stood behind Serena, a silent, immovable monolith of generational power. Julian raised his chin. The overhead crystal chandeliers cast harsh, unforgiving shadows across his face. He looked past the 12 operatives in identical charcoal black suits. He looked at the woman he had tried to bury. He saw her right hand resting flat against the soft, deflated curve of her abdomen. She held the phantom memory of the child he had almost killed. He saw her left hand gripping the encrypted titanium tablet. The blue phototherapy light from the Cedars Sinai NICU feed cast a faint, aquatic glow against the white wool of her dress. Julian clenched his jaw. He forced a jagged breath into his collapsing lungs. The smell of oxidized silver from the melting swan eye sculptures mixed with the sour metallic stench of his own panicked sweat. He needed leverage. He needed control. My lawyers will invalidate the hostile takeover by morning. The threat sounded hollow. It lacked the booming, theatrical bass he had commanded on this exact stage 48 hours ago. It was the desperate gasp of a drowning man trying to negotiate with the ocean. Elias Thorne stepped forward. The lead corporate counsel for Kensington Holdings did not offer a mocking smile. He did not gloat. He operated with lethal bureaucratic precision. Elias tapped the silver remote in his right hand. The massive canvas projector screen behind the stage flickered. The high-definition footage of Julian's blackmail vanished. A live Bloomberg terminal feed replaced the image. The white background glared against the dark glass of the conservatory. 500 millionaires shifted in their gilded wooden chairs. A jagged red line stretched across the graph, VANCE. The ticker symbol for Vance Holdings updated in real time. The price plummeted from $142 down to $80, then $50, then $12. The numbers blurred into a frantic digital freefall. The red line crashed into the bottom axis. The trading halted. A massive red banner flashed across the top of the interface. Delisted. Emergency corporate liquidation. Elias closed his leather-bound binder. The thick parchment pages slapped together. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel striking wood. Your board of directors signed the surrender documents 12 minutes ago, Elias stated. His voice sliced through the hum of the projector fan. They transferred the corporate architecture to Kensington Holdings to avoid federal racketeering charges. You have no lawyers. You have no company. Julian stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. His bespoke dove-gray suit seemed to sag, losing its sharp, tailored architecture. He looked toward the front rows of the audience. He searched the faces of the neurosurgeons, the tech founders, the hedge fund managers he had courted for years. The crowd turned their backs. The neurosurgeon examined the face of his gold Rolex. The tech founder's wife whispered a mundane comment about the floral arrangements to her neighbor. Waiters resumed their rounds, carrying silver trays of iced water past him. The elite society of Los Angeles excommunicated him in profound silence. He was no longer a CEO. He was a cautionary tale. He was a ghost. Outside the massive glass walls of the Crystal Conservatory, the Los Angeles night fractured. Blinding strobes of red and blue light penetrated the vaulted ceiling. The flashing colors bounced off the crystal chandeliers, turning the elegant room into a chaotic, strobe-lit crime scene. Sirens wailed, a high-pitched mechanical screaming that drowned out the ambient murmurs of the crowd. 4 armored black SUVs jumped the curb. They parked directly on the pristine, manicured lawns of the Academy, crushing the imported tiger orchids beneath heavy rubber tires. Marcus Reed stepped forward from the shadows of the entrance. The head of security reached out his large, calloused hand. He pulled the heavy brass handle down. He pushed the heavy oak double doors wide open. A dozen federal agents flooded the center aisle. Their heavy rubber-soled boots squeaked against the pristine Italian marble. They wore thick Kevlar vests over navy blue windbreakers. Yellow block letters spelled FBI across their backs. Static hissed from the black radios strapped to their shoulders. They bypassed the melting ice sculptures. They bypassed the terrified millionaires. The wealthy patrons scrambled backward, knocking over gilded chairs in their desperate rush to distance themselves from the blast zone of federal indictments. 2 female agents stopped at the front row. They flanked Chloe DuPont. Chloe sat paralyzed in her blood-red Valentino silk blouse. She stared at the gold federal badges hovering inches from her face. The manufactured power of the DuPont family real estate portfolio had vanished. Her uncle had abandoned her. The falsified fertility clinic records had exposed her barren lies to the federal bank. "Stand up," the taller agent commanded. Chloe did not move. Her manicured red fingernails dug into the gilded wood of her chair. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. The agents reached down. They grabbed her forearms. They hauled her to her feet with practiced, unyielding force. The sudden movement jerked her neck backward. The massive diamond choker scraped against her collarbone. The thick stones clacked together, creating a frantic, hollow, metallic rattling that echoed through the sudden silence of the room. They marched her down the center aisle. Chloe stumbled. Her heavy designer boots dragged across the polished marble floor. She fought the grip of the agents, her red silk blouse crinkling and pulling at the seams. Through the exterior glass walls, the local press descended. Dozens of reporters pressed their massive camera lenses against the crystal panes. They had received the anonymous tip from Elias Thorne's office. They hungered for the scandal of the decade. Marcus Reed stood by the open doors. He watched the woman who had demanded Serena's public termination get dragged toward the exit. He documented her ruin. His silence punished her. The agents shoved Chloe out into the humid Los Angeles night. Flashbulbs erupted. The brilliant white light exploded in rapid, blinding succession. The paparazzi swarmed her like vultures. Microphones jabbed toward her face. Reporters screamed questions about the fabricated medical records, the wire fraud, and the hostile takeover. Chloe raised her trembling hands to shield her eyes. The camera flashes illuminated the sheer, naked terror on her face. Her leveraged debt and her false throne dissolved in the blinding glare. The agents pushed her toward the waiting transport van. The heavy metal door slammed shut, cutting off the flashes. Inside the conservatory, the lead federal agent stopped at the edge of the crimson carpet runner. Julian remained on his knees. The harsh fibers of the woven rug burned his skin. He felt the crushing weight of the Kensington Vanguard pressing down on his spine. He smelled the oxidized silver basins. He smelled the ruin. He watched the agent unclip a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Julian looked at the metal rings. He looked up at the towering figures of the charcoal black suits guarding the stage. "I can give you the DuPont ledgers, please." The agent did not pause. He grabbed Julian's left wrist. He wrenched the arm backward with a brutal mechanical efficiency. Julian gasped. The bespoke dove-gray fabric of his jacket pulled taut across his broad shoulders. The tension peaked. The seam along his right shoulder tore. A sharp ripping sound fractured the quiet air. The agent grabbed his right wrist, crossing it over the left. The steel cuffs clamped down. The ratcheting metal teeth locked into place. The cold steel bit into his skin. The heavy metal chain pulled his shoulder sockets backward, forcing his chest to bow outward in physical humiliation. They hauled him upward. Julian's knees popped. His polished leather shoes slipped on the marble floor before finding purchase. The agent kept a punishing grip on his bicep, supporting his dead weight. Julian raised his head. He looked past the federal agent. He looked past the silent, crushing presence of Theodore Kensington. He looked at Serena. She stood in the center of the mahogany stage. The white wool crepe dress hung in elegant, unbroken lines. Her right hand remained flat against the curve of her belly. Her left hand guarded the encrypted titanium tablet. The blue phototherapy light from the NICU video feed cast a soft, steady glow over her collarbone. She watched him. She offered no pity. She offered no rage. Her silence was a vast, frozen ocean that swallowed his entire existence. "Serena!" The single word fell from his mouth. It was a hollow, broken sound. It held no power. It held no arrogance. It was the pathetic rattle of a man realizing he had incinerated his own universe. Serena held his gaze. She did not raise her voice. She delivered the sentence quietly, like a verdict handed down by time itself. "I am going home to my daughter." She turned her back. She did not look over her shoulder. She did not watch the agents pull him toward the exit. Theodore Kensington placed a heavy, calloused hand on her back, guiding her toward the private side doors of the conservatory. The 12 charcoal black operatives shifted in unison, forming a moving, impenetrable wall of bespoke wool around them. Serena pulled the heavy titanium tablet flush against her chest, pressing the live video feed of the NICU against her own beating heart. She held her newborn. She walked forward. Julian watched her go, desperate to chase the phantom life he had destroyed. He could not follow. The serrated edge of the steel handcuff bit into his wrist bone, anchoring him to the cold floor. The heavy brass door clicked shut, the steel deadbolt sliding deep into its strike plate.